You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have to let reality intrude this week, or rather surreality, as well as stupidity, brutality, and all the other aspects of autocratic rule, as in Vladimir Putin, as in the blatant murder of protest leader and democracy activist Alexei Navalny. If by chance you haven't yet seen the recent fine award-winning documentary titled simply Navalny, about him, his family, and his life, please do so. He and they are enormously likable, funny, principled, charismatic, courageous, and unpretentious people. It's also a deeply moving film, especially to see on this heartbreaking occasion. But interestingly enough, his widow, Yulia Navalnaya, is stepping up to lead the protest across the former Soviet Union and the former Russian Empire herself. And there's his college-age daughter, 2 women and the remnants of a movement to oppose the war in Ukraine and build an open democratic society in Russia. Of course, this is not the first time a widow has moved or been moved into such a position after her husband's martyrdom, sometimes whether she wanted to be there or not. It's a long, sad litany of names, of which we can list only a few with the greatest respect for their courage and grief for their loss. Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, Mirli Evers. Just recently, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who took the place of her husband, Saurey, as a presidential candidate in August 2020, after he was imprisoned for announcing his intention to run against Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. And, of course, the woman who didn't wait to become a widow, who was a powerful force in her own right and remains so even after her death, Winnie Mandela. This week, in fact, begins the conclusion of our break from recording and analysis from politics, as if there were such a thing as a break from politics. This episode features the first of a 3-parter in our Fables for Grown-Up series, after which we'll be segueing, if there is such a word, back to the news as the election season begins to heat up. And this week and next are, I think, in that 3-parter, I hope, a special treat. It's the reading of my novella, titled The Last Speaker, and it will be the final 3-part story in the Fables for Grown-Ups series. You can come at this a number of different ways. You can wait out the 3 weeks and hear the whole thing at once. You can hear it in installments, week by week. You can buy the book Parallax from Spinifex Press, in which it appears, and read the story. It's up to you. It's a story about deep politics, of course, and it's a story offered with deep respect for indigenous peoples in every possible sense of the word. And so that we do not have to break into the reading of it, we'll pick up right after this first break. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And now for our story. Here is part 1 of the 3-part novella, which you'll hear next week and the week after. Part 1 of The Last Speaker. In a distant time, long years yet to come, the people had finally perfected an ideal society. Of this they were certain. It was a society forged to transcend identification with self, clan, or type, village or district, region or country, a society named in self-description unity. The key had been forged during the centuries of stability, enforced stability, but stability nonetheless, under the world hegemony of the trust. From that came the aspirational process of merging toward the goal of one affiliation, government, currency, one social system, one language. School children could chant the motto, "Unity is the answer, unification the way, unifier the key to all we hear and say." More people congregated in cities now, though some worried that this came at the cost of a sense of place. It was undeniable that a uniquely metropolitan vibrancy bubbled through the stew, former hill people living as neighbors of previous valley dwellers, river folk encountering desert immigrants, coastal sensibilities blending with those from the mountainous inland. As usual, this at first inspired fear, then enmity, then self-separation, groups clustering into discrete neighborhoods. But the government had counseled that over time all this would pass, and so it did, though never completely, a fact everyone tacitly agreed to ignore. Hardest hit were the nomadic peoples, who were firmly, not forcibly, but with an unspoken yet implicit threat of force, pressured to settle down, and who then found themselves privileged to receive special, relentless education in discarding their old ways. Discarding old ways had become commonplace, even fashionable. It was a trend bitter for most elders, savory for most youth. There were transitional challenges, to be sure, but the authorities were not insensitive to them. One such problem was the diminishing presence, then gradual disappearance, of stories. Not that there was a public outcry about this vanishing, but a general vague unease flickered through the population, an indeterminate hunger for something more filling than the sugary or spicy entertainments that proliferated in the absence of the old tales. Those who brooded about such things, principled, thoughtful people, some of whom served in the government, felt a deeper disquietude. They feared losing the past, aware that without stories, history dims. They feared losing the future, knowing that without stories, hope becomes an abstraction, and planning an impossibility. More than either, they feared losing the present, living in the static of boredom, lacking possibility of movement or surprise. The most eminent of these decent concerned persons was a member of the High Unifying Council, a man well past 80 years alive, respected as much for his integrity as for his vigor. A powerful official, still proud of his form of faculty and facility of storytelling, however many years it had been since he'd had time, or made time, to practice that craft. It was he who had driven the government to create the Ministry of Word-Working, dedicated to devising a sleek, modern set of stories in lieu of the old tales. Despite his age, he directed the ministry himself, exhorting his word workers to produce stories of brilliance and profundity that would enthrall, educate, and inspire the populace, as the old tales had. This mission proved more difficult than anticipated. Story after story created by ministry workers failed to engage an audience. The new tales were as shallow and ephemeral as the popular entertainments, yet more pretentious, a compounded misfortune. When the woodworkers reversed direction, however, they churned out stories embarrassingly imitative of the old yarns, though lacking their magnetism, which had, after all, accrued through millennia of repetition and variation. Nor did all wordworkers welcome criticism. The minister couldn't help noticing that those who worked the most superficial or derivative stories were most infatuated with their own words. Yet the minister, who termed himself a word worker, but was called by his colleagues the word worker, as if there were only one, had over his long life schooled himself in patience and flexibility. So he shifted the ministry's focus to scholarship, a discipline more compliant than creativity. Word workers were now tasked with seeking, collecting, and preserving the old stories. This approach meant locating remnants of previously semi-isolated populations who held such stories among their lore. But that presented another problem. Vestigial populations, though of necessity now conversant in the official language, which was unifier, had preserved their own stories in the myriad original tongues of their difference, and under the mandate of the new society, those languages were dying. It was regrettable, but die they must. Recent centuries of war had proven the need for only one communicative tongue. Differences in language had always expressed and reflected differences in perception, culture, even ways of thinking, which seemed to many people normal or at least innocuous. But whole industries of research now concurred that lack of communicative clarity stemmed not, as had been assumed, from how peoples interpreted the variations. Rather, the problem came from the variations themselves, exacerbating differences and, given time, leading to tragic hostilities with blood-saturated conclusions. This conclusion left the people blameless, so was contested by no one. The authorities had expected to phase in unifiers slowly, but even the minister was surprised at how swiftly the concept was being adopted and indigenous tongues abandoned. He knew that a language dies in stages, like a life form. First it withdraws from public use to the sheltering hospitality of those still fluent in it. In the new regime of unity, such people call themselves guardians. Yet the most vigilant guarding cannot save an endangered tongue from increasingly dwindling into the private and intimate. It grows fragile, then feeble. No new words invigorate it, nor can it be comprehended beyond speakers who are aging and dying. The minister never failed to be amazed at the pace with which a language could shift its status, sinking from vitality to endangerment, the state when the number of young speakers declines, then to terminal decline, when only elderly speakers remain, and eventually to extinction, when the final known communicant, termed the last speaker, dies. Learning that a healthy language with thousands of speakers can collapse entirely in just 2 generations was reassuring to the word worker in his role as a member of the High Unifying Council. But it imposed a sense of urgency on him in his word-working capacity, and he recommitted himself to story retrieval in the shrinking time left. He dispatched his word workers across all the territories in search of guardians and, should any be found, last speakers. Their mission was complex, requiring delicate diplomacy. They were to save the stories of these vestigial peoples, but not the languages of the stories' origins, preservation of which carried a security risk of their revival, accompanied by, who could foresee, what violence? The stories were to be collected in the unifier tongue, since no word workers spoke any of the moribund languages. Guardians, who spoke both their own vanishing languages and unifier, could relate their stories in the latter. The Guardians were cooperative, even eager to share their tales, glad of the chance to preserve evidence of their culture from eradication. Most Guardians were old enough to have endured the wars, and they remembered the carnage. Some, aware that identity is one with its expression, had been drawn to join the underground in defiance. But language resurrection is extremely difficult, and that adventure ended violently, with most of its members in exile, chains, or graves. Both Guardians and authorities knew that as a language expires, much of the knowledge, history, art, and philosophy breathing through its stories and its myths perishes too, together with the consciousness informing its unique structure, vocabulary, and grammar. So Guardians had come round, aware that their choice lay between sharing and thus immortalizing their tales, or watching this cherished lore fade into eternal silence. Since compliance had become the norm, it was rare for word workers to encounter a Guardian, still resentful at being asked to surrender stories. Then one day a word worker reported back to the ministry that she had encountered an uncooperative, even intractable, resistor. It was not a Guardian, though. It was an actual last speaker. This last speaker, living in a state of imposed settlement, was a member of a clan that had been part of a great nomadic people, one of the fluid nations that had wandered the territories since before recorded memory. Some formed caravans vivid with jugglers, acrobats, musicians, poets, and peddlers, all traveling, loving, and brawling together, hawking skills and wares and talent. Most were herders, roaming with their flocks in search of pasture land uninhabited by, as they called, settled peoples, sedentaries. The process of unification had fallen heavily on these people, whose experience had endowed them with such a wide view of the world that being compelled to root in one place carried with it an anguish keen as a lifelong prison sentence. Even so, no last speaker had ever been known to turn away a word worker on a story rescue mission. Last speakers were agonizingly aware of their predicament. So this refusal was shocking. Nevertheless, the ministry sent a senior, more experienced word worker to coax forth the last speaker's treasures. When that effort failed, his superior was dispatched. Each returned defeated, reporting that the last speaker was polite but firm, making clear in fluent unifier that the stories were not for sharing unless in their native tongue. Finally, the word worker sent his deputy minister, who, though now old and ill, had been his closest friend since their long-ago boyhoods, substitute family, since neither had bonded with a woman or a man, and neither had children, both having been dedicated wholly to their work. The anniversary of Unity's establishment as a regime was approaching, an occasion at which the ministry planned to announce successful completion of the great culture harvest, celebrating a catalogue of every tale ever related to all the prattle of languages, which would now be available in perfect unifier, accessible to everyone. But the announcement could not be made. There was the problem of the last speaker. It did occur to the word worker's more pragmatic persona as minister that if his deputy could not succeed, unthinkable as that was, the public need not necessarily be informed of this holdout. After all, it wasn't as though anyone outside the ministry knew that this particular problematic last speaker existed. Still, even in his role as minister, the word worker was an honest man, and he found such a solution distasteful, while deciding that it could always be resorted to if all else failed. Then news came that the deputy minister, trying to convince the last speaker to do his duty, had suffered a seizure and died. The word worker was plunged into distress at this loss, only to then realize that all else in this case consisted of himself. He would have to visit the last speaker in person. Might that actually serve, an aide suggested, as a useful diversion from his mourning? The word worker only scowled. He certainly didn't want to go, but he felt it imperative to fill in for his lost friend, completing that friend's final mission as he would have wished. This decision created quite a stir, however, since the word worker hadn't done field work for decades. Nevertheless, he survived the bustle of counselors disagreeing about his trip and set out. But when he and 2 aides arrived at the relocation site to which their subject had been assigned, no one was there. The minister paused, mulling this over, then led the way to a little yard out back of the building. There, in the middle of the city, stood a small, sturdy tent. No nomads, he sighed affectionately. He had worked hard to sensitize himself to primitive peoples, which is how nomads had been categorized. Now he dismissed his aides back to the street to wait for him there, and tapped the small gong at the entrance to the tent. Before the ripples of sound had receded, the tent flaps parted. There stood a slender, short man, alive 30 years at most, with a smooth face, long hair that gleamed like black water at moonset, and heavy-lidded eyes. "You are welcome," the young man said, softly, speaking Unifier with the mildest flavor of an accent. "I was not certain you would." He gestured for his visitor to enter. The word worker stepped inside, taking in with a glance the minimal surroundings. A few cushions, a weaving. No visible cooking utensils, no chests, tables, chairs, bed. Nothing that could not be carried, perhaps in the few sacks that slumped empty in a corner. A double-edged blade of polished brass, like an oversized dagger, hung by a silk cord from the center tent pole. No one else was there. "I am," the minister began. "I know who you are, powerful sir," said the young man in his quiet voice. "You are the minister of word-working. You are a senior member of the High Council. But you also are known as the word worker. Some say you were even once a yarner." The word worker smiled. "You flatter an old man. I haven't been worthy of being called a yarner in... well, never mind. Also, you have an advantage, since I don't know who you are. I am seeking the last speaker. Do you know where I can find... I am here, powerful sir." The young man bowed his head. "But you are young. The last speaker is always old, sometimes older than I am." "I have seen everything perish that told me who I am, powerful sir. I am sufficiently old." The word worker appraised the younger man, courteous and restrained, yet there was something, a suffering emanated from the nomad, like the trace of a dark, heavy perfume, even more intense than expectable in someone burdened with being the last of his kind. "Forgive me," the word worker said, "and please address me by my personal name. I am called Tyak." "Tyak," the younger man repeated. "Tyak, once yarner. Please be in comfort." He gestured toward a cushion, smiling. The smile was subtle, promising sweetness. It made the word worker think of slow-pouring lavender flower honey. Meanwhile, he knelt, gingerly putting down one knee and then the other, and with an awkward plop, landing in the final distance. He was now nearer to the knife, and he tried not to stare at it. "It is a ceremonial object, sir. Your officers allow me to keep it, as they know I am a harmless man from a peaceable folk." Reassured yet alert, the minister said, "Well, I'm not here to meddle with your cutlery. I'm here to convince you to share your stories. And may I inquire your name?" he asked. "You know it," the young man said, folding his legs under him and sinking in one graceful movement to a cushion. "The last speaker is my name now. In me alone live the words, stories, culture of my people." "I meant your personal name." "I am sorry," his host replied. "You would not be able to pronounce it." Careful to preserve his good-natured tone, the word worker protested. "I have become something of a linguist during my years of harvesting stories for unification. Let me try." The young man shook his head somberly. "I will not endanger you. It is most difficult for non-speakers to pronounce. There is peril for someone who has not learned my language. My deputy was a great semantic scholar. Your deputy minister, was insistent to pronounce my name. He would not heed my warning. Finally, I surrendered my name." He tried to speak it. He struggled and kept struggling. He wanted to conquer my name. I could not stop him. His face grew red, then white. He strangled on my name, to my distress, sitting where you are now. The word worker sat up straighter. "The deputy minister was my closest friend since we were boys. I grieve his loss, but I did not know such details of how he died from merely saying your name, from merely trying to say my name. I would not expose you to the same jeopardy." The younger man paused, then added gently, "Tyak, once Yarner, I am sorry for your loss of this friend." The minister cleared his throat. "How, then, shall I refer to—" "I see. You wish to call me something. Name me what you wish." Startled by such pliancy, the word worker stammered, "Well, I really don't—" "Brother, perhaps?" Both his minister self and word worker self were pleased at the skill of this suggestion. The last speaker blinked those heavy-lidded eyes. Slowly. "Perhaps better simply to call me you? Because brother is not accurate. You is more true. For my people, to misuse words is to welcome harm into one's tent." Tyak, stung again, nevertheless marveled how these smarts of rejection were soothed by a sweetness in the man's manner that shifted perspective to more important things. You would be difficult, but very well, he would try. "How is it that the last speaker, that you, are so young? What became of your elders?" "They are unalive." The last speaker neither raised nor lowered his voice. "And where have the rest of your people been assigned home places? How are you alone here?" "Also those in the fruiting of life, and the young in the budding. All unalive." "All? But that's... how did they all come to be dead?" "Unalive. It is a story. I can tell it in my language, but it would not be grasped by your hearing. Unless, he whispered, unless, do you wish to learn my language, once Yarner? The word worker leaned forward sympathetically. Oh, I can imagine how lonely it must feel, being unable to speak your own language to someone or listen to it. No one alive to comprehend. You misunderstand. I invite you to learn for your sake, not mine. I do speak my language, and I listen to it all the day, when walking the city, when preparing food, when waiting for sleep. Ah, you speak to your ancestors, the spirits of your people. What would be that use? The last speaker knitted his brow in puzzlement. They are unalive. Why would a person alive be speaking to those unalive? I thought some cultures, some primitives, do so. The last speaker's smile left the word worker feeling politely pitied. No, I speak to myself. I listen. I answer myself. What does you say? It was dizzying to address someone simultaneously in the first and third person. Besides, he was still occupied and preoccupied with the horrible news that the man was not only a last speaker, but the last of his kind alive. The word worker decided he must task a deputy with finding some answers. What had happened to this entire people? Was it an infectious disease? Had they perhaps joined the underground and been wiped out? Hopefully they had not been the victims of overzealous unity forces during resettlement. Meanwhile, the last speaker went on, unperturbed. I say stories, naturally. Stories are the cloth from which our language is formed, as fibers are the fabric of your cloak. Stories are our lives, ourselves, our way of being. Your people greet each other with certain words, hello, good afternoon, and part with certain words, farewell, goodbye. We greet one another with the phrase, shall we share stories? We part saying, until we share stories again. All my people are in our stories, a multitude of tales. Stories are light to carry, and this is our great wealth. We were called the people of stories. And all of your people had the gift for storytelling? No. Some were never able to unearth their stories, to discover themselves. That saddened them gravely. But they labored to replace that loss, acquiring great craft in retelling others' stories, and in deliberately inventing their own and inventing themselves. We respected them. Then there were a few, 3 or 4 in all my living, who suffered both losses. They could not find their stories, but also lacked the discipline to acquire the skill of invention. They were unhappy as part of our people. They had to leave us. You sent them away? It was their choice. They became sedentaries. We wished them no ill, but he waved his hand as if flicking away a moth. They had no stories. They ceased to speak our tongue. They became unalive. The indifference was smooth and cool as marble. The word worker took a deep breath, then resumed his mission. You are clearly a person of intelligence and dignity. Yet you refuses to save those stories in Unifier. If stories are your language, as you say, if they are virtually inseparable from it, isn't it all the more crucial to preserve them? I cannot understand how such a wise person can let his people's record of existence vanish. Do you not care for your people? He instantly regretted his question. But the last speaker grew even more still, as if he himself were marble, as if he were drawing those accusatory words into himself, as if he were a magnet for filings of pain. Finally he replied, "Hear me once, Yarner. You swim in the current of your people as I do of mine. We are each an instrument of our people's. They choose, and we act so that their choice becomes real. This may be a source of greatest joy at times, at others a source of greatest despair. But always it is our duty, our story, yours and mine. Strengthening your unifier, that is the task placed in your charge. Protecting our stories from defilement, stories of value greater than the glowing stones treasured in your city galleries, because these stories contain our lives. That is the task that was placed in my charge." The last speaker closed his eyes. Suddenly he looked old and weary. Then, just as his guest was about to speak, he opened his eyes and went on. "Still, once not told, stories are all the same. Even ours. Only the telling, the how, makes the difference. For our stories, our language is necessary. It is the how. And though that language would take years to learn, such learning also is the how. Flailing under the logic of such illogic, the minister felt a need to take charge. "I would love to learn your language," he stated firmly, "but I am feeling that your words are a part misuse of truth," his host interposed in the same even tone. "I am feeling you intend me well. You value me, I believe that. But as a piece of art in one of your museums, valuable, breakable, truly appreciated only by someone like yourself. Please inform me, am I feeling inaccurately?" The sophistication of this affably delivered rebuke so unsettled the word-worker that he found himself retreating into his rank. "It is impossible for me to abandon my work to learn your tongue, however great the rewards. Besides, you are already fluent in my language in unifier. I beg you, he cajoled, let your stories live free from the tongue of their making." "Can you live free from the air of your breathing?" The word-worker shifted uneasily on his cushion. "Are you saying that all our work, all of it, that all translation is at its core impossible?" "No, it is possible to translate the content of a tale, but not the tale. And such halfwayness is not for my stories." "Then they will perish. Will you sacrifice them to your pride?" The younger man exhaled sharply, that shadow of grief again. "I have no foods to feed pride, powerful sir." "Nor does it matter. Underground streams flow to the same sea as do sunlit rivers. Are they less real than if they had never been imagined? Someone will reimagine the stories." "Reimagine them? Who? How?" "Someone who will then be the first speaker." Tyak threw up his hands. "You will regret this decision when you face dying alone, many solitary years from now, with no one to speak to who can comprehend. I would not be alone if once Yarner would learn to speak with me." A sweet, sly smile. But the minister clung to his purpose. "My loyalty is to a larger goal," he frowned. "Saving the stories of all the lost tongues. It is my vocation. I do this for all people's sake. I am not free to go where I wish, do what strikes me as interesting. I understand well, once Yarner. How could you, really? You're young. Please do not misinterpret me, but tragic as the loss of your people is, that also means you are free of responsibility for them, free of that pressure. His host cocked his head like a bird, listening. You have no one to answer to. Besides, the minister continued, his tone softening, my son, I'm in a hurry. I'm old. I already know 6 languages. I lack the time to learn yours. Why hurry if not to more fertile grounds? There are many different layers of time. Time is the same passage, always, moments into years, not to my people, powerful sir. Your people are unalive, he stated it firmly, without cruelty. Yet they could live again, forever, in your stories. Why do you care so to save our stories? Because I want the world to be able to share them. Because they are the particular genius of your language, which I respect. Because I respect all the lost languages, whatever you may think of me. I think of you that you made the law that lost them. Powerful sir. I wish to not be discourteous, but I am to trust your respect. Why? The word worker bit his lip, but the last speaker went on in a contemplative tone. As, for example, Tyak, unifier is not an enemy to me, a means for all to communicate. This is a fine story, one of peace, of health. But why erase the individual tongues? Why could they not thrive along with the common language, each enriching the others? His visitor's laugh was sharp and sullen. Ha ha! Because then most people would never use unifier. No trust in those you claim to serve? Those we serve don't trust us either. People are... Never mind. It has always been this way. We do the best we can, believing it's for the good of the people, even if sometimes it seems the opposite. We do the will of the people. The last speaker contemplated his guest. I understand, once Yarner, more than you might think. One can have power over others in the act of being enslaved to them. It is as if, speaking, one cannot trust one's own words not to mean the opposite. Still, it is sad for you sedentaries. You are hardened, fixed, not fluid like water. Standing water grows foul. Also sad for you, Talak, carrying the weight of all those people's stories. Such a rich flow of difference to wring into one blandness. But since I am a primitive, I must ask. Tyak, why do you trust your words? This time the insult was undeniable. All the more so since Tyak knew that it was a genuine question. Because, among other reasons, I am not going to abandon the people of unification, or you, for that matter. But you, according to the records, have vanished twice. We have had to bring you back to be resettled twice. Peeved at finding himself on the defensive, he had finally taken verbal aim and returned fire. Now he felt wretched. His target offered a dainty shrug. I do not understand walls. I do not like them. You have me watched now. I know that. Never mind walls. We are here in your tent, after all. Your place, not my place. This is not my place. Well, yes, that's true. As a nomad, you have no place. His host laughed, a light susurration, like leaves hushing a summer breeze. Tyak, you are a funny man. I have a place. You think we just wander about? It is comical, such learned men so uninformed. Our sense of place is merely larger than other people's, but our movements, though different for each clan, have patterns. Tyak leaned forward. He wanted to get the nomad talking about his people. Our routes follow seasonal growth for the herds, whims of the weather, rhythms of the land. Each place is local home in now while we are there. But we do not own it, so there's no fighting over it. We revere no gods or ancestors. We honor only the local essences of a river or forest. They are of a precise place, so cannot be adopted or stolen or imposed elsewhere. The journey is everything, you see, so everywhere is home place. Every alternate year we travel to a particular southern valley where we and other clans from our nation share stories while our herds graze the lush nettles. Another nation grazes herds there on alternating years. It took 100 annuals of war and 100 peace meets to build the covenant tale for these pastures. Even fields have stories. So everything has meaning, Tyak said admiringly. What a profound game to play. The last speaker opened his eyes wide. Game? Discovering the meaning of each. No. Nothing has meaning. Only the story has meaning. I don't understand. Come with me then, for even a short time. You have power, so we can travel wherever we wish. Let me show you the how of my language. The word worker felt a surge of tenderness for this man, so naive, this man who might have been the grown child he had never had. There's no need to fear meaning, my son, he said gently. Perhaps meaning comes from studying one thing or a few things in one place or a few places all one's life. Perhaps you think nothing has meaning because of all this flitting about in this life that you knew. It's a matter of puzzling out the meaning. That is what constitutes profound play. Anyone who fears meaning doesn't know how to play. It is not to do with fear, Tyak, and play is one how of our stories, but only one of many, while time is another. So is space. Space has no shape. Space is emptiness. Space between is where all our shapes are born. Space between defines what form takes. Come, let me show you. Tyak felt an almost hypnotic warmth surround him, envelop him. He did want to know, not for unity's sake, for his own. Oh, he wanted so. Yes, show me you. Please, he heard himself implore in a high, piping voice, like a child himself. But in a story, I cannot roam about with you. I can listen, though. I want to know you. The last speaker looked long at him, his face a life mask of, was it tragedy or indifference? Tyak wondered. The black water of those eyes, deep enough to drown in. You cannot know me. He rose in that fluid movement, yet it is a story that enters my feelings, a tale of Tyak, that you want to know me, that you want so much to understand. This story touches me. I can tell you only a story about the stories, not the tales themselves. That is reserved for those who can understand them in the tongue of their making. But I can show you a small how of our story, and that how, he cocked his head again, bird-like. Perhaps I might teach you a phrase or two that will not harm you to speak. So it began. That was part 1 of The Last Speaker from the book Parallax. published by Spinifex Press. Next week, Part 2. And the week after, Part 3 and the conclusion. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.